Hey guys, Dennis Tackerman here. Today I want to talk to you about pandemic profits. Now, what do I mean by pandemic profits? Well, this thing's been going on for a little bit of time now, and when things go on for a period of time, especially as we're leaving this, everything's slowly gradually starting to reopen and people are starting to go back to businesses, and the media is still making these lines about, hey, this is the new normal and there's other things. You got to think about where your business is positioned and how you're going to change that going forward, because every time a recession happens, every time a massive market disruption happens, things in business shift. There's technology shifts, there's behavior shifts, there's all kinds of shifts. I know particularly of one company that moved way away from where they were originally doing and shifted into things like those spit screens and those privacy screens they put up in businesses, because now those things are required. So let's talk about pivots and shifts. A lot of people say, well, you got to pivot and you got to shift, but nobody really talks about what that looks like. Look, you can pivot and shift all you want to, but if you don't actually know the numbers of how something plays out, you could pivot and shift yourself right into a bigger hole or basically into bankruptcy just as fast as sticking with what you were doing. So how do you pivot and shift? Well, number one, you actually have to sit down with a pen and paper and do a proper numbers evaluation of what you're trying to pivot or shift to. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you're going to have a certain level of revenue that your business has come to depend upon in order to pay your bills. Now, if you're like the majority of businesses that are out there, the number you've been watching is revenue, and then you've been taking out your expenses and you've been taking out your costs, and you've been going, oh, I really hope to Hades that at the end of this thing I make a profit. That's actually the wrong way to go, and most people go that direction because they've got no idea how to properly pivot and shift. So here's how you properly pivot and shift. The first thing you do is you write out all your expenses. This is going to take a little bit of work. Go back and grab your freaking bank statements and grab a spreadsheet or a pen and paper and some graph paper or whatever it is you want to do, and you write out your expenses. You write out your rent, you write out your utilities, you write out your phone bill, you write out all of your expenses onto a piece of paper. The next thing you have to look at is what's your average margin going to be on a product or service that you're going to sell. So if you're going to pivot or shift, you still have to buy a product to shift and pivot from that product, and you have to make a sale on that product. So I'm going to pivot and shift. So let's say I want to get into spit protectors because now they're going up in everybody's businesses and we're slowly doing this for protection. Fine. What's my manufacturing cost on this spit protector that I'm going to buy? Am I buying it from Alibaba? Am I buying it off Amazon.ca and simply reselling it? Am I actually going to manufacture them myself? If I'm going to actually manufacture them myself, well, then I got to figure out what my SKU volumes are. So how many can I manufacture? What kind of time frame to what kind of sizes? I need to track my time on it because those times are all going to be my direct costs. So I'm going to develop my direct costs. I'm going to put in my materials and I'm going to put in my time. And I'm going to grab a pen and paper and I'm going to grab a calculator and I'm going to say, well, if I can produce one of these spit shield things in 10 minutes, that means if I'm paying somebody $15 an hour, that's about, I don't know, $3, $1.50 in labor. I'm just making numbers up because I don't have a calculator in front of me, and it's going to cost me $8 in material. So I've got a whole total cost of $7.50 on this spit protector. Then the question is, well, what's the market going to buy it for? Now, this is a big question mark because, one, you could compare it to what everybody else is selling for, but I'm going to tell you right now that everybody else who's selling this kind of stuff is going off of what everybody else says that they should sell it for. They're not actually going through and doing the calculations properly to figure out what their margin should be. So let's just say that your manufacturing cost per spit protector is $7. Okay, great. That's the cost of manufacture. What about your cost of delivery? What about your cost to set that up? Go back, grab a pen and paper, and do your best to actually put on paper what the costs are going to be. Now you got to figure out your sale price. So let's assume that you're able to get a 200% markup. Now, a 200% markup only gives you a 50% margin. That means if every dollar you sell, you only get to put 50 cents towards your actual expenses. Now, from those actual expenses, you're going to want to make a net profit somewhere in there. So let's assume you're going to want to make a 10% net profit per transaction. So you're going to put in your sales number. You're going to subtract 50% from your sales number to get your cost number. And then you're going to take 10 cents of that or 10% of that, and you're going to put that towards your profit, and that's going to leave you with 40%. Now what you start to do is you start to increase your revenue and you start to increase your costs until finally all of your margin is enough to calculate to pay for all your expenses and leave you with a 10% net profit. Now, Greg and I have developed tools that make this stuff really simple to do. Like, it's literally like You plug your numbers in, it spits out the numbers for you. But if you don't have that tool, you got to do this all manually. That's going to tell you what your sales number has to be. So you're going to pivot and you're going to move into these spit protectors that everybody's putting up there. Now you start running your numbers and you realize that in order for you to pay for all your bills and to make a profit, you need to sell $10,000 a month worth of spit protectors. Well, now you actually have a plan, because now you can go out there and be like, okay, what do I have to market? How do I have to position this thing? And how do I have to line this all up so I can get to $10,000 worth of sales per month as quickly as possible? Now, I might not be able to get there month one, which is entirely a reality because people don't know who you are and they don't know what the demand is. Plus, because it's a bit of a pandemic time, people are scared to spend money because they don't know if they're going to be around in a month. But now that the government's starting to open things up, then most likely the businesses that are dying or were dying from this thing are already dead. And so now it's just a matter of everybody else picking up the pieces and moving forward. So you're going to go through and you're going to do all this math and you're going to plan out your sales. Now you're going to look at this thing and go, you know what? By the time I'm said and done, if I can make a 50% margin, I can need to do $10,000 in sales. But what if I can get 10% more on my pricing? What if I can get myself into a 60% margin versus a 50? Well, if I can get into a 60% margin, it leaves me with 60% to pay for everything, and I got to sell 10% less. And you're going to start running your numbers. And eventually you're going to find that price point where you're like, well, I have to sell it for this in order to make this revenue. And you're going to run the numbers. Now, if you do all of this work and you run the numbers and your new pivot idea isn't going to be viable, as far as it's going to take you $50,000 or $100,000, or your margin's only 20% when you need to be 50%, it's only 30% when you need to be 80%, whatever, you know to stop and not pivot in that direction. So, pandemic profits. How do you make profits in a pivot? It's simple. You sit down with a pen and paper, you write out all your expenses. You start with your bank statements, you print them off, and you write out all your expenses that you have on an average per month. Then you go back through and you figure out what your manufacturing costs, your production costs, whatever it is, it's going to cost you to bring something to market. And then once you know those costs, you go back through and you develop your margin. You start playing with your margin numbers and saying, if I bought this for 7, could I sell it for 14? If I bought this for 7, could I sell it for 21? If I bought this for 7, could I sell it for 28? You figure out what you can sell it for to come up with your proper margin. That margin percent will be enough to help you calculate what you need to do to cover your expenses and make a profit. Look, if none of this makes sense and you really have no idea what I'm talking about or you're confused, that's a good place to start, because that means you can actually reach out for help. So, pivot, switch, most importantly, ask for help. See you on the next video.